Hi, my name is Jack Mckechnie and I'm the founder of Prepare Like a Pro. Growing up, I loved playing cricket and football and had a strong passion for helping others. Over the past 11 years working in the industry, I've been lucky enough to have worked alongside Sean Murphy, the head strength and conditioning coach at Essendon, Luke Boyd, physical performance manager at Hawthorn, and interned under Andrew Russell, high performance director at Carlton. I started Prepare Like a Pro after my time as a strength and conditioning coach at Hawthorn Football Club to help developing footballers gain a competitive edge with AFL standard preparation methods. If you're a developing footballer wanting to take your game to the next level, we'd love to help you. At Prepare Like a Pro, you can expect to not only improve your athleticism, but also lower your risk of injury or overload. There are training programs suitable for every level of involvement. I would love to help you choose the one that best suits your goals and personal motivation. Head to our Inquire Now page and I'll get back to you soon. Welcome to the Prepare Like a Pro live chat show. Today we have Gary McCoy joining us on the podcast. He's a high-performance coach with a sports science background and has consulted with the leading sport teams and businesses all over the world. Really looking forward to this chat. If you have any questions, use the chat box in any stream that you're watching this live chat, and we'll do a bit of a Q&A at the end of the interview. Currently, Gary hosts the Human Kinesome Project podcast. He's the Vice President of Performance at Kinetyx Science, and he's the Australian National Baseball Strength and Conditioning Coach, which is super exciting. We haven't had someone that works in baseball on the podcast, so really looking forward to tuning in and diving into all the ins and outs of strength and conditioning with baseballers, and I'm sure the strength and conditioning coaches that are tuned into this chat are also excited. Our podcast's mission here at Prepare Like a Pro is to empower aspiring athletes and staff with practical knowledge from some of the industry's most inspiring individuals and to strengthen the AFL community. If you like the show, please show your support by following us on Instagram and subscribing to the podcast. We're on iTunes, Spotify, and YouTube. Welcome, Gary.
Good to see you, Jack. Thanks for having me on, mate.
How does it feel being on the other side of the podcast, the interview? Is it?
Yeah, it feels normal. I went into being a podcast host kind of kicking and screaming. It's been it's fun. I certainly know how you work and how you put it together. But mate, it's good to be here.
Yeah, looking forward to this chat, mate. Thanks for jumping on, and you're our second international. You're an Aussie, but our second international episode, which is it's pretty cool that we can do this in today's world.
Very cool. Yeah.
Let's dive into the beginning of your career. At what age did you discover you had a passion for strength and conditioning?
You know, it was really funny. It was all around sports performance for me. So growing up as a kid, I grew up in Melbourne, grew up in Ascot Vale, right? And, every time I throw that out there, I've got to follow it up with one of my best friends growing up was one of the leading characters in the Underbelly, but we'll stop that conversation there and continue to move because people often ask me, man, you in the witness protection program? Is that why you went to the other side of the world? No, is the answer to that one. So, so growing up in Ascot Vale.
Underbelly.
What's that?
One of my favorite TV series.
Yeah, brilliant, right? So growing up in Ascot Vale, I had a choice at the end of my high school certificate, which it wasn't back in the day, right? I had a choice. I had a kind of a visual arts kind of gift, and I thought graphic design was potentially going to be the future. But I really liked the sports I was playing. I just finished kind of swimming at a very high level, followed a cousin into baseball, was really enjoying that. So then I had an opportunity to go into physical education over at Victoria University, then FIT. And how I made that decision, mate, I could walk to one in like 15 minutes or as a bus and a tram to the other one. So kind of indirectly, geography made a decision for me, but the passion was always there. My true north has always been the evolution of the athlete. And how do we make, in my day when I was playing, how do I get better? But now it's all about how do I get that athlete better? So that is definitely true north for me. So it fit in really well.
And who was sort of like the first athletic development coach or strength and conditioning coach that you were involved with?
Well, there are a number, right? So baseball, like moving into that at the age of 15, yeah, it's a fledgling sport, I guess you'd call it in Australia by Australian standards. I think the participation level is something like 50,000, 60,000 participants only. And, which isn't bad, but, it's certainly not a high-ranked sport. But there were coaches I was having, one that lived in Melbourne as I was getting to an elite level. He actually worked at the Victorian Institute of Sport for a while. His name's Matthew Sheldon Collins. And Matty, as I got to know him really well, he was the first one to start this kind of journey towards let's break down the sport and let's analyze it, and let's analyze the conditioning components for the sport. So while he didn't have a background as a strength and conditioning coach, he certainly broke down the physical systems elements of sport really well. So I would say he was the first, and then the journey kind of continued on, and mate, still being influenced by some really sharp minds, which is great.
Yeah, fantastic. So you're an athlete in swimming and baseball. At what age did you have to put the athlete hat off and focus fully on the coaching side of things?
Yeah. And I guess our strength coaches listening to this, I don't think we ever take the athlete hat off. It just comes on with less frequency, right? Due to aches, pains, and everything else. I would say it was probably, I want to say 2005, 2006. I pretty much hung up. I'd already relocated to the US and was playing a lot of amateur baseball here. At a decent level for age bracket level and stuff like that. But I really shifted full time into a strength and conditioning role in 2007. I was kind of doing consulting work. I had a role which really exposed me to a lot as director of education for a equipment company called Cybex. So back in the day, big strength, big isokinetic manufacturing company, and all the data that we were aggregating and applying into the learnings and how to make a better chest press and how to make a better lat pull and all these other things biomechanically that we're doing scientifically. I was in a really nice role where I could go out and apply that to different teams around the world. One week I'd be in baseball with the Cleveland Indians inside their clubhouse working with their athletes. Then I'd be on a plane going to Europe, working with like Manchester United and have guys like David Beckham, who was a rookie there at the time, right? And doing testing on those guys. So it was a really, really fortunate opportunity that I really made the most of, not only in terms of learning from great sports and great teams and great practitioners around the world, as well as great athletes, but keeping a really open mind and networking really well is what I did in that role.
Yeah. Something that's already coming through is the scientific approach that you have, whether analysis from performance or from the biomechanics side of things. Is that something that you were drawn to during high school and then applied to your coaching as you sort of got into the trade, or is it something that you've always
it's something I picked up. Like I tend to analyze failure pretty hard, right? And so if an athlete fails, a team fails. So I think we all do that to a degree, right? You enjoy the success, but you really analyze why in the failure side of the equation. So I think it started for me when, in this role I had with Cybex, one of the things I had to do was figure out what made our equipment feel better and perform better than other pieces of equipment. And a lot of that had to do with arthrokinematics, locations of positioning of the moment arm, the various loads, et cetera, and put it all together into training even our salespeople on how to have that discussion with a buyer, right? So it really started there on a micro level, like let's look at where the axis of the knee is relative to position on, say, a leg extension for rehabilitation, and then take that out. So, but I've always, and I think it's one of the biggest problems in comparing what's lacking in the US in sports science to what we have in Australia and what we have internationally. What's lacking here is a real fundamental ability to analyze the physical systems and how they impact the technical ability in sport. It seems to be that things are just thrown on the wall to see if they stick. And when I come in and break it down, one of the first questions I'll ask is, give me the key performance indicators for this position, and now for this athlete, and now for your team, and how that all blends in together. And sometimes just asking that question, it'll take 2 hours to get an answer, right? And it shouldn't, right? It should be pretty simple. We want this guy to do this repeatedly. Okay, well then let's build that. But that analysis seems to be lacking a fair bit here, and probably good for me because it keeps me employed.
And a few more Australians are following. So for the S&Cs listening in, why do you think that is? Because there's obviously a lot of strengths that come out of American performance. Their athletes are unbelievable. Why do you think the analytics and the sports science strength, that side of it is lacking? Is it?
It's really interesting. Like coming back to Australia, like in 2013, the end of 2013, I was headhunted by Catapult Sports, and I took on a role with them as their senior applied sports scientist. And the then CEO of the company, Sean Holthouse, said to me, "Look, we've failed in the US at getting our product into that market. We tried to bring this product into baseball, and we kept hearing your name. You know, you're one of the Australians that's worked there." So I was actually working in Taiwan at the time, and he said, "Hey, do you want to go back home to the US and do this for us?" And I'm like, "Sure." And it was a wonderful opportunity because subjectivity, and all, I think, strength and conditioning coaches have this discussion at some point with a tactical coach, a member of the organization that they're working within. They'll give you their opinion, and it's very much subjective. You know, this guy's out of shape. You know, how many times do you hear that? Well, where's that coming from, right? You hear all these questions. What I hoped Catapult would do, and it really did for me, was create objectivity around a very subjective arena of discussion. So, and so for that, to that end, to answer that question, I think that's where it kind of started. And then that process of applying data and creating objective kind of measures was the thing that all of a sudden.
Oops. I think
muted there. Sorry. I realized really quickly that we were way ahead in Australia, and then I tried to unpack why. Why are we so far ahead? And it was like, I think our lack of medals in the Olympic Games in '76 drives the Australian Institute of Sport funding, right? And then I kind of jokingly tell a story in America that, hey, in Australia, we don't care about global warming, curing cancer, but damn it, we care about gold medals, right? So sport's our religion. So having that, So I tell that story, but in the US, it's a very much a strength and conditioning model, but it's fit the athlete into the exercise, don't design the exercise for the athlete.
Yeah.
That is a big problem. So I even remember and recall, and I know that like Major League Baseball teams will be hiring strength coaches for their system, right, next year. And a lot of the times I'll say, hey, send in a video of you performing a squat and tell us what the cues are for the squat, right? Well, guess what? There's only one player on a baseball team that should be doing a squat, and that's a catcher. Right, it's neurally backwards for just about every other athlete. Right, doesn't apply to the bilateral asymmetry of that sport. They don't even ask. We're not even asking the right questions yet. But the strength and conditioning culture became so popular in the US. You got a lot of strong athletes, but boy, they are fragile.
Yeah, it's such a it's an interesting topic, and I love the fact that you mentioned the AIS and 1977, where it's all sort of started, and I guess it makes a lot of sense. It sort of reminds you of the of if you haven't got all the talent, you've got to find a way to make the most of your talent, don't you? Compared to potentially in America, there's the whole heap of high caliber athletes, so you either survival of the fittest because you can afford to. Where for us, we've got to sort of look after them.
Well, exactly.
There's a hybrid of the two where both of them programs can help each other, or both philosophies, I should say.
Yeah, and you see it right on the nail, mate. And I think that one of the things, like I had to define sports science, like why does it exist? Like, so I go into an NFL team. This was the Cleveland Browns. I think it was back in 2013, 14. And they're like, well, sports science, can you define that for us? How should we be measuring our success in that channel? Yeah. And I said, well, let me come up with, I started to come up with this quote. I said, there's really two laws in sports science. Law one is decrease preventable injury.
Yeah.
And law two is optimize the genetic potential of that athlete within the sport, technically within their sport. If I just had to put it down to those two things, and that's kind of the yin and the yang, training has to, first and foremost, every exercise kind of lives on a risk-benefit spectrum. We cannot risk not having that athlete available for the game on Sunday if it's the NFL, right? We can't risk having that. And we've got to make sure we're optimizing performance to what they need to do and understand what they need to do and how they need to move on the field of play. So when launching that in, it became a really like a point of discussion. I started getting picked up in the media quite a bit, and I'll never forget Tom Habistro, his name is. You can look him up. He's ESPN basketball kind of blogger and is on ESPN quite a bit. He looked at me over a coffee and he said, so Gary, what you're telling me is the best ability is availability. And I was like, oh, mate, that's my next T-shirt or the next sign in the clubhouse, right? And so we kind of hung on to that term, but I truly believe that. And I think at the core of it all, we've got to make sure we've got healthy, available athletes, and then as a sidebar to that, 100%, hitting their optimal genetic potential.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. Thanks for breaking that down. Those two laws are massive for hopefully all listeners listening in and noted those two down. And for the developing athletes as well that are listening in, what would be some habits that you get excited about when you're taking on a new athlete and they're already starting to do some things?
Yeah, look, rule number one for me taking on a new athlete, I use the term, I got to look at them through childlike eyes. Right? It's not let your own confirmation bias creep in from other athletes. And in a sport like baseball, it's really, we're a skill-based sport, but there's an art to pitching a baseball, and there's a science to it as well. And so 50% of the roster in baseball is pitchers, so they're the predominance of the athlete type that I work with.
Yeah.
And sometimes I'll have pitching coaches come to me and say, well, he should do this, he should do that. And I'm real sensitive to this word should, because should is based upon a set of measures or markers or values that somebody else is putting in place, right? Yeah, and I try to teach the coaches to look through, okay, I always ask, which lens are we looking at this in? Are we looking at this athlete through the lens of injury prevention? So now I've got to go back and look at his injury history, everything that's happened, where they are, even in contract, in terms of contract link with that team, so we know what resource application we need to have. Are we looking at this through a lens of optimal performance, like throwing the baseball as hard as we can, that velocity factor, right? Velocity and spin rate are the two key performance indicators that coaches generally tend to look at in baseball. So looking at that, if that's the lens we're looking at, I've got to create it repeatably, but not threaten the risk of injury. So trying to get the optic around it is key for me. So approaching a new athlete, that's the very first thing. Who are you? Where are you? Tell me your throwing history, your game history, your injury history. I've got a guy right now I'm working with who's in Japan, so his film is back and forth just about every day. I know him really well, but I had a gap period where things changed on him. And so I have to start from scratch all over again. So I often joke, I've been approached like 3 times to write a book on baseball conditioning. And I was like, well, I'll only be 60% accurate because that other 40% is all individual, right? It's individualized. And I need to, Jack, if I'm writing a program for you, I need to understand you. There's a dozen assessments I'd want to do on you before I'd make one recommendation.
And are you noticing the individualization of the sports science is starting to, now that you've been in America for a while, speaking to other colleagues, is it starting to spread amongst other clubs?
I wish it would spread faster. And I won't mention the teams because it's a little embarrassing, but there's 3 NFL teams I worked with 2 years ago that one size fits all in terms of what they do in the weight room. So it didn't matter if you were a wide receiver or a lineman, you were doing the same workout program. And I was like, oh, look out for that, right? Say that again, mate.
As well as injury history as well. So that didn't matter.
Didn't matter. Yeah, it didn't matter. So I'd love it if it accelerated fast. And look, America is not always the first, but they generally accelerate on this curve pretty fast. They'll throw a lot of money at something and bring it forward. I'm still waiting for that kind of vector to sweep up in sports science. And look, it's not there today. I was fortunate in baseball in Asia to have a 0 injury season. And so that got picked up in the media over here, picked up by the New York Times. I get a lot of inbound inquiries around that, but there is a science to that, and there is a lot of work that goes into designing an injury-free season. And look, the sports here aren't close. I wish they were closer, and they're getting better, but it's marginal gains. There's no question.
Yeah, no doubt. People like yourself, it will speed up and hopefully, accelerate the development. And like you said, once the awareness is there, everyone will be on board.
Yeah,
sure.
Yeah, and Catapult, ironically, Melbourne company Catapult, they're kind of the default operating system for sports science globally now, right? So they got a metric, player load. You're probably really familiar with it, right? So the sad thing is load management is probably the most misused or misunderstood term in most sports in the United States. And I kind of feel guilty in part because we developed that metric based upon data we were getting from the AFL, right? So all this running, now try to apply a player load score to 43% of athletes in the NFL that don't run, right? Yeah. Player load, 95% of that equation is distance, distance. And so now they're going, we've got a player load score on a left tackle in the NFL. It's irrelevant. Yep. Look at the oscillations. Look at the force output. There's so many things that I think Catapult did incredibly well, but what it also has done is open up what's missing. And there is also, I think with technology, we can't rely on it wholly. We've got to understand those error coefficients in tech and have a confidence interval applied to how we're using that data prescriptively.
And do you see that going forward, that a company like Catapult would have a specific player load to each sport?
Absolutely. And I think there's a couple of really smart people now two people in the NFL. One was kind of my right hand for a long time at Catapult, Dr. Ben Peterson. He was finishing up his PhD, and I gave him his first job. It was actually a sales job at Catapult. I said, mate, I don't know where this is going to lead, but I think we're on the front end of some really cool analysis here. Well, he's now the vice president, I think, or head of performance for the San Francisco 49ers. So his application of data, I know, is probably second to none. The Buffalo Bills also secured Emma Beanland, who we brought to the US from Melbourne, who was a sports scientist with Catapult, and she's doing some phenomenal work over with the Bills. So, look, it's getting better. The good news is technology and data, I think, is probably ahead of the right questions for a lot of the American practitioners. Like, they haven't got the question ahead of the theory ahead of the model that they're trying to present. So, look, with smart people coming in, those sports are only going to get better.
Yeah, awesome, mate. And you've mentioned a couple already, but who are some other strong influences that have helped shape your career, like mentors?
Oh, man. And it's really funny. I don't know if I use the mentor term well. I don't know. I think it was a bad Seinfeld episode that I kind of shrugged me off that term. I don't know. But definitely influence. I'll give you some names off the top of my head. So Dr. Marcus Elliot, who runs a lab out of Santa Barbara called P3. Marcus was kind of shunned out of baseball. When I met him, he was the only scientific mind I found in the game of baseball. Does some phenomenal work, is now in charge of the NBA Combine, does an incredible musculoskeletal assessment on athletes, and with the data sets that he has, I'll never say anyone can predict injury, but boy, he can show risk of injury probably better than anybody else. So definitely him with P3. Alex Mckechnie, who's an assistant coach with the Toronto Raptors. Learned so much from him. This is a guy that cured Shaquille O'Neal's kind of back and oblique injuries when he was with the Lakers, and went to the Raptors, and through reduction of injury drove them to an NBA title a year or two ago. So he's absolutely brilliant. Dr. John Meyer over at the University of Southern California was another one. He's now with the Clippers and the Kings. And And I guess even recently at Kinetyx, like Dr. Brianne Everett, she was a plastic surgeon working in distal neuropathy for diabetics when she developed the technology. She hires a guy to be president of this company, and I'm trying to figure it out. This guy's an energy trader. His name's Corey Paddock. He used to trade in energies. One of the most brilliant guys I've ever met. He's kind of like mortar between bricks in a system. So, mate, you keep your eyes and ears open. I always say, look, if you think you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room, right? Get somewhere where you can learn. And I've often, like some people say, like on some radio interviews, this guy's an expert in human movement. No, don't call me that. Call me an expert learner. Don't call me an expert, because that's what I think I've gathered the ability to do.
Yeah, that's great philosophy to have, because we're continually learning, aren't we, and sharpening our craft.
Well, we hope. We hope we are, right?
Yeah. On that topic, what's one of your favorite ways to develop your methods and sharpen your practical skills and science? Is it free tools? Is it speaking to colleagues, like workshops?
Yeah, no, it's again, really fortunate to have the social capital I have to be able to walk into the NBA league office at any time and talk to the number 2 and 3 guys there. And I think Catapult gave me a lot of this kind of currency to be able to do that. To be able to talk to guys like Darren Burgess now at Melbourne, right? I've kept in touch with Burjo since I met him in 2013. I think he was with Adelaide and, came over, went to Arsenal, and, having his brain to pick. David Tenney, another performance guy who's in soccer, having his brain to pick. I was on a performance advisory board with the group leaders in performance, and some of the people that were on that were just stunning in terms of their academic credential. Guys like Andy Walsh, who was over at Red Bull, and like listening to them, and like we kind of would craft philosophical questions. Like one of the biggest ones we're kind of grappling with, which is probably an entire another episode here for you, but it's this central governor theory. I don't know if you've ever run across it, but what is arbitrary capacity in terms of human performance? Is it mentally driven? Is it physiologically driven? What is it? Right? It was raised, I think, first in 1999 at an ACSM conference here, but just picked up recently in a book, Endure, by an endurance athlete, Alex Hutchinson. Really good read, and he kind of tries to unlock this theory pretty much. So we've had a couple of good discussions around what it means for a marathon runner versus what it means for me to unlock a velocity on a baseball pitcher. So it's getting in and being fortunate to have those conversations, to have decisions, watch decisions in organizations work, not work. That is probably to me more impactful on me and my methodology and my applied side than probably research is, because like how many more 9-week studies can I see on 18 to 22-year-old males, right? Yeah. It's like, okay, here we go. There's another one. So research is needed, but better applied research, I think, is needed.
Yeah, fantastic. Awesome, mate. We'll have a quick drink break. Here's a video about our Academy guys, and then we've had a couple of Academy members send through some questions for you, Gary, which will be good fun. So
no worries.
Quick 60-second break. Here we go.
Hi, I'm Jack McLean, an AFL football strength and conditioning coach, and I want to introduce you to the Prepare Like a Pro Academy. Our Academy is a subscription-based platform where you can sign up to be a part of our community. If you get to the end of each episode of the podcast and are hungry for more, this is for you. Designed for aspiring AFL athletes and staff, you'll receive heaps of bonus weekly content, learn who the guests are in advance, and submit questions. Access to our Facebook group with Jack and other Prepare Like a Pro coaches. You'll be able to receive merchandise, program discounts and freebies, and get free access to our live events, exercise technique database, and much more. This is a great way for you to support the podcast, and it helps me with production and release of epic content for you guys each week. Your contribution goes a long way in making the Prepare Like a Pro community possible. For a small monthly fee, you'll have access to all of the special content released on our Academy forums. There's no lock-in, and you can cancel absolutely anytime.
Welcome back, guys. This is my favourite section of the podcast. We have a couple of members that have sent through a question. One, Troy, who's working with a baseballer, Gary, and he's. I'll read out the questions, but there's sort of three messages to it. So he's working with an athlete who is on the verge of making the Australian women's team. She's extremely fast and powerful, hits well, and great in the outfield. And then he's gone on to say she's still quite young and feels this could be one of the factors holding her back from making the Aussie team. What do you think could get noticed by more selectors? What could she do, I guess, to get noticed by more selectors? And then his last part of it, are there any specific exercises you would also recommend when programming for baseball athletes?
Yeah, so firstly, great question, and thanks, mate, for pulling that down. And women's baseball has just really taken off, and I love it. It's fantastic. I think, we're looking forward to that, maybe 10, 12 years down the track where I think we'll see some women professional baseball players in the American minor leagues. I think will evolve to that point. It's really interesting, like when you say she's extremely fast and powerful, hits well, and is great in the outfield. Generally, what I'd like to do is she hits great. Well, what does that mean? She hits great, right? Does she hit it where they ain't fielding and, falls in and she gets on base? That's one thing. But as a strength and conditioning coach, and I'll kind of give you the philosophy of how I look at things for an athlete, like the foundation for all our athletes is emotion, right? That's where they make all their decisions from, is their emotional kind of foundation. So it's emotion first, cognitive ability second, look at the physical systems third, then on top of that, it's the technical ability from those physical systems, the tactical use, and then the strategic use, which is quite often governed by coach and others. And that's going to create an outcome that's going to feed back into that emotional foundation. So you've got this constant kind of upbuilding cycle that goes on. So as strength and conditioning coaches, where do we fit? What's our role? It's to fit between the physical systems and the technical abilities of that athlete, especially in a sport like baseball. So when you're breaking down, okay, she hits great. Well, hitting great in baseball at the major league level that I work at means two things. It means ball exit velocity, how hard that baseball's being hit, how fast it comes off the bat, which is kind of an indication of all the physical systems, from visual, cognitive, kind of knowing where that ball is going to be and squaring it up, all the way down through creating the right axis planes and having no leaks in the kinematic energy that creates that exit velocity of the baseball. That's one. Launch angle's another one everyone talks about, because if you have the right launch angle and you hit the ball hard, well, it's going out of the park or it's getting into a gap, it's getting above the fielders, right? So key performance indicators, tying those to the physical systems of the athlete is step one. And so if you're looking for greater bat speed, sorry, mate, go ahead.
Well, what was that? So launch angle, what's that for?
So it's like, so instead of we used to always be taught in baseball, hit down on the baseball. Now that a lot of the teaching is hit up on the baseball, because if you're making contact at a fastball coming in at 95 miles an hour and you hit the baseball and the ball exits the bat at 110, 120 miles an hour, if you hit it at that angle, it's going out of the park and you're going to create, more, you're going to score more in the game. So launch angle is exactly that. So those are the two factors we look at for a hitter. So as a strength coach, I'm doing everything I can to get ball exit velocity, so better bat speed to create better ball exit velocity, and then working on her ability to hit kind of gap to gap neurally. How does she line up? Is look at it kinematically and understand, are there leaks in the system? Are there preventions? Great story. I had an athlete. He was an All-American college player. His name's Brett Wallace, actually lives in the Phoenix area near me. Had him with the Astros. And a hitting coach came to me and said, dang it, Wally won't pull the ball, which means he won't hit the ball towards left field third base side. He won't pull it like an onside in cricket, right? He won't hit it to the onside. And I said, and we were standing around a batting cage, and I said to the hitting coach, I said, hang on a second, what do you mean he won't? Is it that he won't or that he can't? Let's unlock his body. Let me do some assessments on him, pull him out of batting practice, one of the first things I found was his hip internal rotation on his front side was shot. So he couldn't even get around to execute pulling the baseball. So sometimes the physical systems are the rate limiting factor. So in terms of coupling that all together, there's a number of things like your athlete, if she's young, she probably doesn't have a lot of injury history or too much to worry about, probably bounces back, has the right collagen, right, can bounce back from injury pretty quick. But if for all my baseball athletes, I mean, it's really, really simple. The very first thing we do when they're off the field is offset the asymmetry that is created in baseball. If you're a left-handed hitting and left-handed throwing outfielder, you turn right for nothing in the sport, right? So it's like driving a car. If you've got bad wheel alignment, then guess what? Something's going to break down. So offsetting that asymmetry is always step one, bilateral asymmetry. The second thing to offset, because of the skill-based sport and the fact that you're sitting around leaning on stuff most of the time, is anterior-posterior asymmetry. You offset those two things in the beginning, it'll give that athlete a better foundation to work from to produce power and will offset a lot of injury. So I always start there with those, and then everything else is very individually governed by their own movement signature as a hitter, thrower, etc.
Love that. What an answer.
Sorry, long one. It's not an easy one. Long one, yeah.
I snapped this portion of the podcast up and put it on the Patreon page, so the Q&A, so Troy can review that section.
Yeah. Make sure my email's on there too. Look, I'm happy to dive in and help solve some of these problems. What I live for, man. So that's fun.
Yeah. So that philosophy could apply to all ball sports, really, because and particularly I love the physical side where it's like, let's assess and see if there's a physical issue and why they're not doing it. And give them more options,
Yeah, well, exactly. And I think my wife is she's a professor in nutrition at Arizona State University. So she'll call me in once a year to the she has master's students graduating class, and she'll call me in to do a guest lecture. And I start all my lectures with two things. Because you've got variety of sports and backgrounds and everybody in this room. Very first thing I say, look, let's all get on the same page. One, the human body was designed to biolocomote within a gravitational field. That's what this structure is designed for. Does anybody disagree? Rarely anybody disagrees, right? The next thing is we'll talk about the human body is the best thing about the human body is it's a phenomenal compensation machine. It compensates around injury. It compensates around dyskinesis. It gets the job done. It figures it out. That's the brilliant side of the human body. The problem side of the human body is exactly the same thing. It's a brilliant compensator. So all of a sudden you've got this, especially post-injury or when something changes, it's like, how do you unpack and unwrap that new neural pathway? And should you, right? Or do you, right? So those are things that we look at. I think those things are constant for me all the time in looking at an athlete. And until I don't do a lot of work in swimming, even though I was a swimmer. That's the only sport one of the only ones I know where gravity isn't a part of the equation. So, yeah. Yeah,
love it, mate. We're getting a small taste of your analysis and how you break things down, and it's great to see. It's inspiring to. There's so many skill sets to a good coach, and it's great you're opening up to.
It's life learning too, man. No one's got it. No one's got. This didn't come with a user manual, right? So it is just incredible. If someone's governed, one of the things I've had to hire a lot of strength coaches, and you'll get this. You'll create a role delineation, and you'll have the position description, role delineation. You'll get these resumes come in, and they've got the right academic credentials. US is big on certifications. They've got the right certifications. Then beyond that, they've had some experience or limited experience, depending on the role you're hiring for. And that's I talk about as the two-dimensional kind of analysis of the individual. I don't care about the two-dimensional. I'm looking for this dimension. What moves you forward? I think it's overdone. The old, what's your why thing, I think is overdone. But really, if you're driven to work with athletes in human performance, it's a lifelong career because you'll never be an expert, and that's beautiful. That's wonderful.
Yeah, Yeah, thank you. That's great. We'll go into that now. That this section actually is exactly on that, the sort of the get to know you section. So it's a bit of fun. Which movie or TV series has impacted you the most and why? And it can be anything. It's nothing to do with S&C.
Wow.
Just yeah.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. Get out on the edge. Like, get out on the edge on some movie stuff a little bit. Like, The Doors was a great movie. Val Kilmer's version of The Doors. I really like that. I like to see what makes high performers, no matter what channel they're on or what frequency they're operating on, what makes them high performers. My wife had the opportunity. We went to see this show Hamilton, which was all over, the US as a Broadway show. And we got to meet the cast. And as soon as the lead came out, I'm all over him, trying to ask him, what's your process? How do you do this? How do you project to the back row on seven sessions a week? So anything that's got anything to do with somebody who's different and performing at a really high level. A movie Without Limits, Steve Prefontaine, his story I think was really good. I got introduced to that when I was at Cybex, and that was very interesting to unpack that. So those have been good. But what's funny is when you work in sport and it's your job, when you finally want to break, I tend to go into music and look at music documentaries and stuff like that. So I'm really down that channel a fair bit.
Yeah, the artist side comes back in.
Maybe. Sorry, mate, long answer to that one, but yeah.
So, good.
Couple there. And the underbelly, of course, because I know everybody.
Yeah, for sure. Favorite inspirational quote or life motto?
Wow. Inspirational quote or life motto. After coffee, everything else makes sense.
There you go, Melbourneian.
I'm no good before coffee. And I read that the other day. I was like, everything else does make sense after coffee. Nah, mate, look, there's probably a ton you could dive into. I try to find my own sense, have a good mate of mine over here is a guy by the name of Dr. Jeremy Bettle. He was the head of performance for the Brooklyn Nets when we first met, went to the Toronto Maple Leafs, went to the Anaheim Ducks, now over at New York FC. And I had a phenomenal conversation with him the other day, just talking about how to value yourself within an organization. Because I feel for a lot of our strength and conditioning coaches, because especially here in the US, when something goes wrong, it's your fault. When something goes right, you never get credit.
Yeah.
Right? And so that's a pretty negative self-image that you're getting whacked over the head with every other day. So how do you get outside of that and know your own value and know what drives you? And if it's that altruistic, the evolution of human performance through the athlete, if it's that, then just shut out the noise. And that's, I think, part of the strategy and part of the wisdom as you mature and you've got some success under your belt, you can shut out the noise.
Yeah. On that, do you think how there'll be weekly reviews, monthly reviews, half season, end of season? What's your take on reviews?
Yeah, it depends. Depends who's doing the review. It depends on how they're measuring things, right? So one of the things I've learned, especially in Major League Baseball, I had 9 hours worth of interviews one day with a Major League team to be their strength and conditioning head coach. And I walked out of there and I said, you know what? There was not one person in there qualified to even interview me. I'm talking to front office people. They don't even know what you do. They can't decide what it is. Creating reviews are fine. And this was a quote I actually picked up at an MIT Sloan conference. I was fortunate to be backstage in an event that President Obama at the time was in. And he made this comment. I'll never forget it. Where it was about 20 of us in a round table, and he's there, right, with Secret Service everywhere. And he made this comment. He was telling a story about something he said during one of the crisis situations he was dealing with. He said, look, he goes, you're entitled to your opinion. What you're not entitled to are your own facts. Entitled to your own opinion, not entitled to your own facts. So when people are doing reviews, I think it's incumbent upon the strength and conditioning coach to say, hey, you know what? If someone says he's out of shape or they're like this, well, that's your opinion. let's go to the data. What does the data say? And if your work is supporting those data changes, it shuts up every conversation. It's fact. You cannot argue the numbers. So I would say do I like reviews? As long as you have the opportunity to present facts, I think they're phenomenal.
Yeah, and that's a good lesson right there for aspiring S&Cs to do. Don't ignore the sports science element because it could save your job.
Exactly.
Yeah, or get you a job, I guess.
Yeah, that too.
In your work, what makes you angry, i.e. pet peeves?
Yeah, exactly. The coaching staff we talked about that have opinions that aren't based on fact. And look, I try to always, if you point the finger, you got 3 pointing right back at you, right? The very first thing I have to do is always, and I think this comes from age and time as well, step back and understand, why is somebody making a comment that may not be based upon fact, and pull them aside and try to understand, try to be, you have to be psychologists sometimes and understand, is that coming from a place of fear? Where is it coming from? Generally in elite sports, it is, because guess what? You lose that job. There's only one way you're going, and that's down, right? Yeah. You've been a strength coach under the bright lights of the NFL and NBA, Major League Baseball. Now, boom, now you're down you're working at 24-hour fitness as a personal trainer trying to make ends meet, right? I mean, I get, so that fear is kind of innate in there, but the thing that, I used to have a lot of pet peeves younger. I think they've subsided, but it's the inability to discern fact from opinion, I would say, is a big one.
Yeah, that's a good one. What about your favorite way to spend your day off?
Okay. Surfing if I could, but I'm in Arizona, right? So it's a 6-hour drive to San Diego. Day off. Catching up on sleep generally. It's probably the starter, but look, I got really lucky and married over my skis, as most of my friends say. I got a really brilliant, smart wife. So just being in that aura for a little while, good enough for me.
Awesome. And then the last one is, what's your favorite holiday destination and why?
Wow. Okay. So that's a tough one, mate. Haven't traveled a ton.
This is COVID as well.
This is pre-COVID. I had 4 trips since COVID kind of hit, and just finished the 4th one. But probably Italy, Lake Como. My wife and I just really enjoyed that. But you know what? We spent time up in Noosa. I was working for the Brisbane Bandits one season in the Australian Baseball League, and we had the opportunity. She came out and spent a fair bit of time in and around Noosa, Queensland. Yeah, look, it's not normally location. It's probably mindset, that I can apply in a location. So whatever, Hawaii is always good, right? Get off the plane, you're automatically relaxed. It's like they got, I don't know, Valium in the air or something. I don't know what it is, but it's pretty good.
Yeah. I've been to Hawaii once and absolutely loved it. It's I didn't get. We surfed once, but I've been taking up a bit of surfing the last year a bit. So I'm with you. It'd be good to.
I'll give you a funny story real quick. Catapult 2014, we have a performance workshop, and I convinced the guys at Catapult to give me $50,000 to put this thing on, right? So we're going to fly in all the strength and conditioning coaches that we were working with from the NFL and NC2A football.
Wow.
We wanted it in Hawaii because of the Pro Bowl was in Hawaii, which is a big event. So a lot of kind of overflow cachet, that halo event there. Flew in Darren Burgess, David Tenney, a lot of the guys who have used Catapult for a while and to give presentations. And one of our NFL consultants, older guy, says to me, "Hey, we want to take these guys golfing." I'm like, man, most of the strength coaches here are like in their mid-20s to mid-30s. They don't want to golf. They do surfing lessons. And then Bowden Westover, who's just left Catapult, who was a vice president of marketing, says, "Yeah, why don't we put Catapult monitors on them and we'll see how they go. And we can show that the next day." I'm like, that's a brilliant idea, right? So we go down to the beach. We lay out all this stuff. We've got 24 monitors and vests all laid out. I look at Bowden and I go, "Mate, are these things waterproof?" And he goes, "Oh, shit, no, they're not waterproof." I was like, "God, okay, hang on a minute." I go tearing off across the road to this little ABC store, which is a convenience store in Hawaii, right? Packed with tourists. I walked straight up to the counter. I said, mate, I need 24 condoms. I need them right now. Where do I find them? So
Lateral thinking is
you're
fair.
looking at me like, what's going on? People are like, where's the party? Yeah, it's down on the beach, guys. So we put these models, tying them up in condoms. And the funny thing was, Eric Ciano, who's the head strength coach for the Bills, had one of the best wipeouts we'd ever seen. The data was all there. It was brilliant. To this day, I mean, it's coming up. It'll be coming up soon on 10 years later. I'm still saying to him, Eric, you're the worst surfer I've ever seen, mate. That was Hawaii.
Oh, that story. That's awesome.
Classic. Things you got to do, right?
Yeah. A bunch of S&Cs get together in Hawaii and they surf with GPS.
Yeah, it was fun.
Surrounded by condoms. What could go wrong?
Exactly. Yeah, fun stuff.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming on, mate. You're doing plenty with the podcast as well. So, where can people find you? Where your socials?
Yeah, it's really, the podcast stuff's really interesting. The Human Kinesome Project. So our CEO, she said, we've got a human genome. Why don't we have a human kinesome? Which really piqued my attention. Right? We all have individual movement profiles, and that movement adds or subtracts from our overall health. So one of the things we're looking at Kinetyx, which is like a force plate in a shoe that's about to be released, is looking at those changes in force, pressure, everything else, and imperceptible. You don't even know it's in your shoe. Phenomenal technology that I think is going to govern some up kinematic chain kind of knowledge and exploration for us. So Human Kinesome Podcast, you can find out, I think, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts. I think we're about 8-9 episodes in. Did a really good one with the women's ninth place finisher in the marathon, Melinda Elmore, last week. That was a good one. You can catch me on Twitter. I think it's Strength Coach 21. Gary at McCoyperformance.com. You can email me. Your questions. There's no such thing. I think actors say there's no such thing as small parts, only small actors. Well, there's no such thing as a small question, only a small answer. It's like, let's unload them, because I learn from this stuff, and like you get to a point, especially in a rotational sport like baseball, where there's so much we still don't know, and that we're still discovering. Somebody's going to have a question. It's going to change my vector as well.
Yeah, love it, mate. Thank you so much for jumping on. And for those that are tuned in later in the chat, make sure to watch this from the very start, because Gary's not only talked about his journey and how he's got to do what he has, which has been a great career, but also his philosophy, which has been a really good insight to how to go about it for all S&Cs, but also athletes as well. So thanks so much, mate. It's been great.
Very welcome, mate. My pleasure. Looking forward to seeing more.
Yeah, definitely, mate. And if you're in Australia, or if I'm in America, I'll have to hit you up. My wife's American as well, so there's a bit of connection.
Yeah, fantastic, mate. You got to get over here, because I doubt I've already done quarantine once. Oh, it's rugged. I don't know if I'll be back too soon.
Yeah, I think we'll be over with you guys for sure.
Awesome. That'd be fun.
Awesome, Gary. Thanks again, mate.
All right, mate. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Cheers, guys. Thanks for tuning in. If you absolutely love this episode, which I sure did, make sure to follow our podcast. We'll launch the podcast recording in a future Monday. We launch a new episode every Monday. So we're on iTunes, Spotify, and YouTube, where we post the video content of the episode. And we've got a special giveaway for those that tuned into this live chat. All you need to do is take a photo of your favorite episode of our podcast, post it on your Instagram story, tag Prepare Like a Pro, and we'll give away a 4-week strength and conditioning program valued at $120. So thanks for tuning in, and until next time. Cheers, guys.